Welcome to Year 9 Geography. My name is Gabrielle and this is Lesson 2 in our unit on ecosystems. The topic for this lesson today is biomes. Let's do a starter activity. Look carefully at the pictures that you can see on this slide. When you're ready, see if you can name 2 micro and 2 macro habitats. So take a moment to pause the video now and write down the answers to the question. When you're ready to check the answers, restart the video. Welcome back. Here are the answers to our starter activity. Well, in our first picture here, we've got a wolf standing in a forest. And this is an example of a macro habitat. It's large, lots of plants and animals, and supports a large variety of creatures. Here is some pond water. This is a microhabitat. It's a small space which only supports a limited amount of plants and animals. Grasslands, another macro environment or macro habitat. It supports a large variety of plants, animals, and insects. And finally, an iceberg. This is an example of a micro habitat. It supports a small number of creatures living in a small space. How did you go? How many did you get correct? Let's move on to learn about our learning objectives for this lesson today. Firstly, to name some major biomes in the world, and secondly, to geolocate or say where different biomes are in the world. Firstly, let's learn about what is a biome. A biome is an area of the planet that can be classified according to the climate, the plants, and the animals that live within it. These are the world's biomes. They all have different environments and different plants and animals. In these biomes, there are multiple different ecosystems. Can you think of any? So let's have a look at our biomes. We've got the ocean, of course, the biggest. We've got wetlands, which exist in some parts of the world, for example, through the Philippines and Indonesia, some parts of Australia, New Zealand, and North America on the west coast, North America on the east coast. So many coastal areas have what we call wetlands. Temperate forests, these are the light green areas. So the areas where there are lots of temperate forests are basically through Europe and Russia, along the east coast of China, Japan, through Canada, and most of North America. Some parts of South America as well, and some parts of Australia. Tropical forests exist mainly along the equator, and these are the areas of dark green. So South America, Brazil, the Caribbean, Mexico, parts of Africa on the west coast, much of the Pacific, including much of Southeast Asia, and some parts of northern Australia. Mountains in purple, so huge mountain ranges down the west coast of America and Canada. We've got the Andes Mountains down the west coast of South America. We've got the Himalayas in Asia and the Alps through Europe. Grasslands spread all over the world. Got some grasslands in the middle of the USA, some in South America. Most of the savanna regions of Africa are grasslands. Plenty of grasslands through Central Asia and India. Some in Siberia, northern China. Plenty of grasslands through Western Queensland, South Australia, Western Australia. Lots of deserts in the world. Of course, the biggest one is the Sahara Desert here in northern Africa, and a big desert that takes up most of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Also a big desert in central China, and a big desert in Australia as well. And the polar regions in white, so much of Alaska, northern Canada and Greenland, Siberia in Russia is the polar region, as well as Antarctica down the bottom. So let's look at the lines of latitude, the most important ones that you need to remember. So I'm sure you all know about the equator, which is the line that runs at the zero horizontal line of latitude in the middle of the Earth. But on either side, you've got other lines of latitude. In the northern hemisphere, it's called the Tropic of Cancer, and in the southern hemisphere, it's the Tropic of Capricorn. Let's watch a video now which explains what biomes are.
When you look at pictures of Earth from space, what's the first thing that you see? A blue marble, as some have described it. A water world, where oceans and swirls of white cloud dominate. But most of us will then have our attention drawn to the shapes imprinted on its surface, the continents. And they come in many colours. The white of Antarctica, the beige of the Sahara, the light green of grasslands, and the darker shades of our planet's forests in their many forms. So many of these colours that give the world its look are the result of trillions of individual plants growing upon the surface. Which plants grow where is determined by many factors, with climate being the most dominant. Desert and scrubland, savanna, prairie and steppe, tundra and taiga, woodland and rainforest. They are at the base of almost every food chain of every animal, the habitats that sustain all other life forms and ourselves. Collectively, they are known as the biomes, the living landscapes of Earth. Landscapes have been an inspiration to us for centuries, the subject of countless painters, writers, photographers, and movie directors. The natural vistas of our home countries and foreign lands, perhaps more than anything else, determine that area's character. And whilst these landscapes are shaped underneath by topography, the presence of coastlines, hills, and mountains, their surfaces are defined by the degree of plant life growing upon them. Earth's vegetation is almost infinite in terms of the variety of species that grow upon it. As plants are wholly dependent upon liquid water, what type of species grow where is determined primarily by annual patterns of temperature and rainfall in that area, the local climate. An abundance of heat and water produces the greatest growth potential, such as in the tropical rainforests, while lower temperatures or rainfall reduce such growth and shape the plant life in various ways so that it can survive drought and frost. The main groupings of plant varieties in this regard can be thought of in the following way. Trees, from the coniferous evergreens of the boreal forests to mixed temperate woodlands and the evergreen broadleaf forests of the tropical regions. Shrubs, occurring in almost every climate zone, either as a junior partner in forests or dominant as they are in semi-arid areas such as the Mediterranean. Grasses, again occurring in almost all areas, but known especially in their singular biomes of the tropical savanna and the temperate prairie and steppe. Desert adaptations, with cacti being the most well known, very cold adaptations such as found in tundra. These adaptations span the basic classes of plants in terms of evolutionary heritage. For instance, the class of flowering plants known as angiosperms are found in every category as just described. The term biome is often confused with the concept of a climate zone, but these are different in nature. A climate zone is defined simply by the patterns of temperature and rainfall, and these are discussed in detail in my Secrets of World Climate series, which you can find linked top right. Biomes are the adaptations of plants principally influenced by climate zones, but by other factors also. Perhaps the most interesting of these is the different ways in which plants evolve in the same climate types, but isolated on different continents. For instance, eucalyptus forest dominates the eastern seaboard of Australia, which has the same humid subtropical climate to that of the southeastern United States and of southern China, and yet we do not find eucalyptus in those other continents, but instead oaks or bamboo. In the opposite way, many species have adapted to live in multiple climate zones. For instance, the pine tree family can be found from the subarctic to the tropics. Another influence is the type of soil that might be present in a region, from sand through to silt and clay. As the soil affects drainage of water away from roots, this affects what species will be present within the same climate zone, since plants have different sensitivities in this regard. So climate zones and biomes should never be thought of as synonymous. In fact, the subject of biomes is significantly more complex because of life's way of evolving along different paths through random mutations when presented with the same external conditions. This complexity is evidenced by the many different attempts to classify geographical distribution of biomes over the last century and a half, with varying degrees of consensus. By comparison, climate classification has been dominated by a single figure in all this time, Vladimir Koppen. On that subject of climate, let's return to that and focus on how and why, exactly, differing patterns of precipitation and temperature can so markedly affect the type of vegetation covering an area. In the 1940s, Leslie Holdridge developed this graph showing how a combination of temperature and rainfall could produce the different biome types observed across the planet in what he called life zones. At first, this looks like a beast of complexity, but if we break it down, it will make sense. From top to bottom, we have increasing temperature, either from the poles to the equator or the tops of mountains to the sea. On the right side of the triangle, we have annual precipitation, from dry in the center to wet on the right. The combination of temperature and rainfall yield a factor called the aridity index. It is actually the ratio of potential evapotranspiration to total rainfall. Evapotranspiration is the combined effect of direct evaporation of water from the soil, plus the outward transpiration of water from plants through the gas exchange cells in their bodies. Potential evapotranspiration is the maximum possible amount of water lost in this way, assuming that there would be a limitless amount of water available. The highest temperatures combined with the lowest rainfall produce the highest aridity index, and this is where we find deserts capable of supporting little if any plant growth. Both cooler temperatures with weaker sun and consequent low evapotranspiration, or a wetter climate alike, allow for plants and soil to retain more moisture and thereby increasing plant growth. And so at the opposite end we find rainforests, either of the tropical or temperate variety. This concept is key in understanding how regions with differing rainfall and temperatures lead to different types of vegetation. It's not simply about which areas have more or less rain. Take, for example, the boreal forests, which have a similar total annual rainfall to the semi-arid Sahel just below the Sahara Desert. Totally different biomes despite the similar rainfall totals. But because the boreal forests are much cooler, they can retain more moisture, leading to extensive biomass, whereas plants and soil in the hot Sahel lose much more moisture in comparison, leading to stunted shrub-like vegetation and plenty of bare earth. In this series, we're going to use the recent classification known as LONS 08, based on Dorman and Sellers' work of the late 1980s. This global map shows the 13 different biomes delineated by this classification. Starting at the equator and moving roughly outward toward the poles, these are summarized as follows. Tropical evergreen forest, where tropical heat combined with year-round rain permits broadleaf trees to retain their leaves permanently. Tropical seasonal forest, where tropical wet and dry seasons cause broadleaf trees to lose their foliage in the dry season. Savanna, where the tropical dry season is of sufficient length or severity that trees are largely replaced by grasses. Shrubland, where the challenges of wet and dry seasons in both the tropics and more temperate latitudes lead to a domination of shrubs interspersed with grasses. Semi-desert, similar to shrubland but where the aridity index is so high that hardy shrubs or specially adapted families such as cacti can grow. Desert, where the climate is so dry that virtually no vegetation is possible, the biome of bare earth. Prairie and steppe, where a lack of rain combined with cooler temperatures in the mid-latitudes prevents tree growth and allows grasses to dominate. Temperate forest, the classic broadleaf woodlands of the mid-latitudes, whose trees lose their leaves in winter. Mixed temperate forest, where broadleaf and evergreen coniferous forests are mixed at the mid-latitudes. Boreal evergreen forest, where cooler temperatures in more polar latitudes lead to the coniferous tree growth dominating in the vast expanse of the taiga. Boreal seasonal forest, like the taiga, but where the winters are so severe that even the supposed evergreen conifers lose their needles in this season. Tundra, where summer temperatures are too low to allow for the growth of trees, leading to cold-adapted, low-lying shrub-like vegetation. Ice, where no vegetation is possible due to year-round freezing conditions. In this series, we're going to look at each of these areas in more detail, showing real examples of places where these exist and the dominant species found in each. I hope you enjoyed this introduction. If you did, please like and share this video, and ensure you're subscribed to my channel so you get.
Okay, so that's a really interesting series, which you can see down the bottom of the screen. It's by Geodiode YouTube channel. So if you're interested in learning more about those different biomes, you can check them out on YouTube. Okay, so why are there different biomes in the world? Well, basically, there's 5 factors that explain the difference in biomes: the amount of rainfall, the latitude, the altitude, the relief of the land, and atmospheric pressure. So just to recap about the lines of latitude, can you remember what they're called? So what's the one at 0 degrees? What's the one in the northern hemisphere at 23.5 degrees? And what is the one in the southern hemisphere at 23.5 degrees? So if you can remember what they're called, just have a think about it or write them down. When you're ready to check the answers, restart the video. Welcome back. Here are the answers. So remember, the one in the northern hemisphere at 23.5 degrees is the Tropic of Cancer. Of course, the equator is in the middle at 0 degrees, and the Tropic of Capricorn is the southern hemisphere line of latitude. Copy this grid into your books. So take a moment to pause the video now while you do that. High pressure, this is where the air is sinking, so it's dry. And the latitudes where high pressure can be found are 30 degrees north or south and 90 degrees north or south. Areas of low pressure, the air is rising, so it's wet. So we're talking about areas around the equator, and it's 60 degrees north or south. So think about the 3 factors that affect the biome. We've chosen amount of rainfall, altitude, and relief of land. So think about this question and write the answer in your notebook. How would these 3 factors affect the biome and ecosystems on Mount Everest? So take a moment to think about that question and write down the answers in your notebook. When you're ready to check your answers, restart the video. Welcome back. Here are the answers to our question about the Himalayas and Mount Everest. So the amount of rainfall that Mount Everest gets results in a dry climate high in the mountains. So there's no plants because it's pretty much freezing all year round. Definitely no insects and no animals can live that high. In terms of altitude, the air is very thin, so it's hard for animals and people to breathe. And the relief of the land, well, basically it's very steep and mountainous, and there's no suitable flat areas for settlement. So that's why Mount Everest is unable to sustain human settlement or very much life at all. So let's do a plenary activity now. You can see 4 pictures of biomes. Can you match each picture with its correct biome name? So pause the video to answer this question in your book. When you're ready to check the answers, restart the video. Welcome back. Here is the answers to our plenary activity. Picture A shows a coniferous forest. So that's a forest with lots of pine cone trees, which reproduce by making pine cones. B, here is a camel sitting in a semi-desert. So there's a few rocks around, a few tiny little shrubs. There are some plants, so it's not a true desert. It's a semi-desert, but still very dry. C, of course, is a tropical forest with our toucans sitting on a branch. And biome D is an ice or polar climate where there's very few plants. And the birds that live there, such as penguins and other animals like polar bears or seals, rely on fish for their food. That brings us to the end of lesson 2 on biomes. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to visit our website www.voyagerschool.com.au for more valuable courses in more subjects for high school students. See you next time.